Good morning, everyone. Welcome, scholars. My name is Amy Markowitz. I teach and support scientific writing at UCSF and in lots of other places. And I do this little intro set of slides because I've had a very circuitous path to my career. And people always wonder how you become a scientific writer or really a scientific editor, which is really what I am. I'm not a writer, as I am very, very fond of saying to people. I have not had an original idea in about 3 decades, but I can edit the hell out of yours. And it really is a different skill set. It's a lot of left, right brain kind of things. And the way I came to this was that I practiced law for a lot of years and very quickly stopped practicing law when I had, you guessed it, a babysitter crisis, but a truly catastrophic babysitter crisis. And my kids at that time were almost 3 and almost 5. They just turned 24 and 26 and managed to survive that catastrophe and go on to many others. But I decided that I needed a job that was not to be a full-time litigator at a large firm in San Francisco, which had a rather inflexible schedule and various other things that made it very difficult to be running a small family and a career. And when you are training as a lawyer, especially as a litigator, which means that I was in court, what you spend a great deal of your time doing is not prancing around a courtroom, but really writing persuasive briefs to the court, to the other side. And I really started to realize that persuasive writing, evidence-based persuasive writing, was the same no matter which discipline you were in. It was just a matter of restructuring or slightly reorganizing what you did. And I started to, this was 1996, and although the millennials in the room will find this extraordinarily hard to believe, email is actually new. And so people had just started receiving manuscripts and grant reviews via email. And you could actually edit them with track changes rather than with your Selectrum with the reverse whiteout and all this other kind of stuff that we used to have to do. And I started sending email around. I was in San Francisco. We have a medical family. And I started sending email around to all of our colleagues who were early faculty exactly at your stage at different universities around the country, saying that manuscript that got bounced from the first 2 journals that you sent it to, that grant that you have to resubmit, I can help you with that. And people started sending me via email rejected manuscripts, grants that needed to be turned around, all this kind of stuff. Track changes was new. That was another quite interesting innovation. Macs and PCs did not talk to each other very well, so when you worked to track changes on my Mac and somebody else's document that was generated from a PC, it lost all the formatting. This went on for years. I mean, it sounds kind of hysterical when I tell it to you, but it really was the case. But it was way better than having to handwrite and then FedEx or UPS or overnight Global Express something to somebody else. And that's basically how my career got started. It was unintentional, and it has been really the greatest serendipity of my life because I really think I have the best job in academic medicine. Every day is a new adventure because I open my inbox in the morning, and I never know what the content is going to be. And over the years, I have become the adjunct scientific content both expert and support person for our K program in our as we call it, the CTSI, that's our CTSC equivalent at UCSF. And I helped to run a research consortium out of San Francisco General Hospital that focuses on traumatic brain injury. And that came about because I helped to manage and edit and submit 2 very large multi-center grants that sort of formed up the research initiative. And the working relationship that I developed with the PIs was so extraordinary that they invited me to come on as kind of strategic planner. I do all our editorial work. We're now starting to write our renewals, so I'm in charge of kind of anything that is content flows through me. And also through all of this, my work became known around UCSF, and I started to get requests from other places to come and help them with large renewal grants. So one of the most fruitful, the other piece, early in this, and possibly the most relevant, is that a group of friends of mine at UCSF got a grant that was funded originally by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation to put together a series in JAMA on palliative care. This was when palliative medicine was known as end-of-life care. It was very much downstream. There was absolutely no content, certainly not in medical school, barely in training of any other sort. And we decided to create, they asked me to come on at the point where there wasn't even a series there, just the funding, and design a series with them that was a case-based series to highlight different aspects of palliative care, different disease processes, different kinds of patients, different points in the trajectory from diagnosis to death. And I would interview the patient and the providers and sometimes family members, and we would take that substrate and then do a literature search, figure out who's the best, most innovative person writing on that topic, send them the transcripts, and then with them develop an article that was kind of a case management, case-based, evidence-based series on how to really train the JAMA readership in palliative care, because there was no general medicine journal that was even looking at this at the time. That we thought was going to go on for maybe 3 years or so. It lasted for 9 years. We ended up creating a textbook out of the compendium of the articles. That morphed into another series in the Annals on medical error and quality, called Quality Grand Round, so quality really in hospital. And then the other JAMA series, when the palliative care piece came to an end, we moved slightly upstream to do a similar case-based series on geriatrics. And that also went on for about 3 or 4 years, at which point I became very well acquainted with your division of geriatrics here, because several people here wrote for my series. And so it's been this wonderful collaborative thing that's sort of grown up with various divisions of geriatrics that are doing research and are really at the forefront, of which Weill Cornell is absolutely one of them. So that's how my chops in what editors at journals might be looking for really was developed, because in each of these series we had a section editor who was assigned to our series, who I worked with very closely over those many years. And we wrote a lot of different kinds of articles. So there were series, there was original research. We wrote viewpoints and sort of points of view articles, editorial articles, policy articles. And the breadth of all of that gave me a pretty good perspective on the way people should design and execute a manuscript to get it the best chance of actually at least being reviewed, which is all that we can guarantee. We can't guarantee acceptance, but to at least be read and go out for review seems like a reasonable benchmark. So as I said, I've gone, let's see if we're moving here. Maybe you can just advance the slide one. So as a result of all of this, I've gone to many different places to help write renewal grants, and you can just advance one slide, that would be great. Or not. Anyway, so I spent the better part of Zimbabwe working at the University of Zimbabwe on a writing workshop that also developed because I helped to write and help them to manage the writing of a renewal grant, which is NIH funded, and developed a very there. And so now they have me come back every year and do an on-site writing workshop where it is run very similarly to the way we're doing it here today. Didactic lectures, I work on works in progress with them, form small groups, and then we just work virtually through the rest of the year. One of my case scholars left UCSF and went to run the research arm in Southeast Asia of MCAR, and she invited me to come to Bangkok a number of summers in a row to do a writing workshop where they gathered their investigators from all over Asia to come to Bangkok for a week and do exactly what we're doing here. So it's really, no matter where you are, building local capacity, very local within yourself, within the group that you have some influence over, is a fine mission, and I hope something that you guys will take to heart. So the final thing is I work very hard, but I also believe in very hard play, and this is also my moment of public service announcement to you that figuring out how to strike a balance in your life between the extraordinarily hard work that you do as clinicians, as researchers, as colleagues, as mentors, is a very important thing to having a long life in this field. It can be really grueling when you're in those grant cycles. It can be grueling when you have to stick with rejection after rejection after rejection, and it happens to all of us. But if you have a few things that you can do to release yourself from that sense of rejection and know that there will be success at the end, it's very important. And one of the most really meaningful pieces here, well, up at the top there, that's thing 1 and thing 2, they're the ones who are now in their mid-20s, and we're the ones that really, I wish I'd had the foresight to know that I could leave a job that I hated and was taking too much of me to do a job that really fulfilled me then, but good to know that 20 years later. And my mom, who, this was her 80th birthday, and her desire, after having been in education for 50 years and retiring, hadn't had enough quite, and went and became a docent at the Met, and loves the Bierstadt paintings at the Met. And so she was visiting me out in Colorado and saw this beautiful mountain in the distance and asked what the name of it was. And I said, "Oh, that's Mount Bierstadt." She said, "Oh, Bierstadt, I want to climb that." So for her 80th birthday, Pete and I took her climbing, and she climbed Mount Bierstadt at 80. So that is the benchmark that I'm going for. And it does, if you have a goal and you stick with it, you can get there. So how do you get there? You find ways to train yourself to do things efficiently and well, and not creating the wheel from the very start, and not reinventing wheels when there are wheels that are already very well created and developed. And that's what we're going to do over the next couple of days. People think that there's some kind of mystery to both grant writing and manuscript writing. And it isn't a mysterious process. There is an actual, I call it an algorithm, because in the many years that I've been editing people's work, I've seen the same patterns developing where people get stuck. And there's absolutely no reason to get stuck, because there are very clear ways to set up your pre-writing of a paper and your writing of a paper so that you can sort of checklist your way through each section and not find yourself just staring at a blank page. I want to reassure all of you also that there's no need to take notes or anything else, because everything is freely made available to you. I know Sarita puts the slides up onto your CTSC website. All the materials will be available to you. So if you want to write, you're welcome to write, but really everything will be there. I also want to encourage you to use and reuse these slides. It is one of the features of our line of work that we teach something, or we learn something one day, and we are immediately teaching it in the next minute. And I'm sure all of you will have medical students or PGY 1s and 2s who you will have to be mentoring in their first research cycle. And I really encourage you to use the slides that we will be using today in the manuscript writer's algorithm and in the effective grant writing tomorrow, to help them to understand what the process looks like and how to get themselves through it. So that's, I think, all that we need to do.
Is this cool?
Yeah. So I call it the writer's algorithm, as I said, because I really do know that there are processes that people approach a paper with, even if they don't think that there's a process. So just out of curiosity, somebody want to tell me how they started the last paper that they wrote? What was the first thing that you did? Figures. Figures? Yeah.
Figures.
Introduction. Results.
But I didn't know what I had to do.
But you didn't know what you were doing. But that's, all of these things are ends of one to one extent or another. Everybody will develop a process that works best or better for them than some other process. But I think the important thing is to really kind of do a little meta-analysis for yourself of what works and what doesn't work, and think very carefully about what process works for you and then replicate it. If it's not working, quit and try something else. But if it's working, don't start flailing. Don't start from the position of flailing. Start with the idea that you're going to develop a process. And what you'll see in this set of slides is that at each stage of sort of the pre-contemplative, thinking about the paper and then sitting down to write the paper, there are different tasks that you can do. You can, we don't have any pharmacists in this cohort, but they love when I tell them that you can aliquot the tasks of a paper. And you really can. And you aliquot according to the time that you have at any particular moment in the cycle of developing the paper to fill that time with efficient, useful, kind of go forward kind of work. So today's agenda really is just going to be about presenting, how you present your research, how you think about presenting your research, teaching writing skills, but also teaching yourself how to be a good self-editor. And then we're going to sort of go through the sections of paper, which all of you know already, but you'll see what I've given you here are a different series of checklists and a different, sometimes several checklists for each section of the paper that you can draw on depending on how relevant it is to the type of paper that you're writing. And because we all learn differently, sometimes having a different articulation of a set of checklist questions is helpful. So I'd really encourage you to look through all of them. It seems repetitive, but it's by design. It's so that when you go back and perhaps use this, the next paper that you write, you'll decide which one works for you, which one really speaks to how you're going to get the answer down so that you can then progress the paper. And then finally, managing reviews. We'll sort of dash through when you are successful in having your paper reviewed and the reviews come back, how you manage that resubmission. So please interrupt. I personally don't think that writing has to be a solitary experience. You do not have to check yourself into an isolation tank and have 6 hours at a stretch. As I said, you can aliquot the tasks a little bit so that it spreads it out somewhat and gets you and keeps you going. So the starting place really is that all research involves some kind of simple finding. And when I say simple, I don't mean simplistic or facile. I mean a distilled down idea that is really the headline of the paper. So just as a proof of concept, I want you all to just think for a minute and write down what the highest, most distilled level of message of the paper or the piece of research that you're working on right now is. Just the healthcare in the UK is better than healthcare in the US, or the, survival after surgery is worse than survival with medical therapy, right? So whatever the association is, whatever the relationship is, whatever the directionality is, just kind of think at that very high level and give yourself a minute to write that. Right, kind of finish up that idea. Okay, so somebody read me what you've written in this bare 1 minute.
ELD deletion causes cancer cell death because it inhibits mTOR activation and transformation.
Okay. That's a very, I know that paper. I know that grant. I edited it just a few days ago. And this is an extraordinarily complex topic. But she managed to distill, at least for non-onc people, non-basic science people, even maybe non-clinical medicine people or clinical medicine people, a very clear objective of the paper, the directionality of her findings, and you have a very high-level view of where that paper is. And you can imagine how you could turn that into perhaps a paper title, right? You want to repeat it again?
PLD inhibition induces cancer cell death because it inhibits mTOR activation and transcription.
So, that's going to have to be refined an awful lot, but you kind of know where she's going with it. And this is part of the theory of when you're thinking about, looking at those masses of Stata files, or you're kind of just looking at tables upon tables and tables, you have to come up with what the overriding message is that you're writing toward, so that a reader who is an interested but perhaps a little bit careless reader would nonetheless know exactly where you were going, right? And part of that also is a distilling process. There were a lot of other ideas that might have been floating around there, but when you finally got down to it, that's what you knew you were writing towards. That's what you knew that the mass of your results were going through. Anybody else with a different frame?
Expert. I don't have Expert drug platform will be superior than standard PDX-01 in drug discovery.
Okay, same idea. You know what that basic sort of highest level idea of the research is and where this paper is going to go, as compared with maybe the 3 other papers that you can write with the same research that you've just done, but that have slightly different angles to them. So that's when you're sitting and thinking, these are the pre-writing tasks, before you have to actually put your hands on the keys and experience that clutching in your chest and the diaphoresis and everything else that makes you want to run away and go do whatever it is besides write a paper. This is a task that you can do kind of sitting on the bus. This is a task that you can do waiting in the dentist's office. It gives you just that sense of where you're going, which is really, really important. So I've said it's an algorithm for how we do things, and we can all do things many different ways. There's really only one rule, and the rule is to know your data. You have to be truly the person, not your biostatistician, not your mentor, not your research associate, not your clinical research coordinator. You are the one who has to absolutely know this data, its warts, and its oids and omas, as we refer to them, but also its shining points. And you have to know that data inside and out, because until you've convinced yourself that you truly have a result, that you truly have findings that are real, there's no way that you can start to write a paper. And until you're convinced of this, you shouldn't be writing a paper. Does everybody kind of have that feeling and know where you're going with it? Because it's not enough to rely on your biostatistician sort of churning something out or doing it yourself and not being certain about it. Double check it, and before you start, make sure you know your data. So the first level of review for you, but also for the section editor who's going to be ultimately the recipient of this paper that you haven't yet written, is whether your data are new, true, and important. So if you do nothing else but kind of assess where you're going with the new, true, and important kind of framework or bar, it actually tells you a bunch of things. New is, are you advancing the field? Is what you have to say going to be supportive of a fact or a theory that was on slightly shakier ground before? Is it true? Are your research methods, is your analytic method robust enough to actually support the statement that you're making about it? And is it important? Does anybody actually care about it, right? So the next part of your process, and again, you haven't even started writing yet, is who cares? And I don't mean who cares. I mean, who cares about this message that you developed per 2 slides ago about what that overarching important fact is that you want your interested but perhaps slightly careless reader to immediately come away with. So the best way to figure out who that is figuring out who your audience is. And the audience is the audience who reads a particular journal or two. Now, if you write with your mentors still at this point, in large part I would guess, there's a set of journals that are your typical go-to journals, and those should be your typical go-to journals. But ways to think about how to sort of make your career jump up a little bit is to think about where there are reach journals, where there are crossover journals. Where have you published before? Have you served as a reviewer someplace before? So a lot of these are going to be your first author, your first author journals. And if you haven't first author published before, thinking about places where you've done some reviewing is often a good start. The other thing is a pragmatic piece, and that is if you are writing a grant, you want to cite yourself in the first paragraph of the preliminary studies, ideally, right, in that scientific premise. You want to be part of the group that has formulated that scientific premise. So you want to get that darn thing published. Our team cheer is out of the inbox onto the CV. So if you're going to publish in Health Affairs, they have a 6-month turnaround by the time they get back to you with even their reviews. There are other journals that are much faster and have made it a point in a practice to be faster turnaround. Get the thing published before anything else. The other strategy of how to figure out maybe where a good target is for an article is to find the most equivalent published article. So the first couple of references that you cite, maybe even in your intro, that sets up what the state of the field is, have been published in journals that hopefully, likely, are still going to be interested in this field and your next in order article. So those are good choices to look at as potential homes for it. The other thing that, do you guys know Jane? Have you guys heard of Jane? Jane, the Journal Name Estimator. You take a look at it afterwards. Jane is a a search platform that allows you to take an entire abstract and plunk it into a free text field. Take a couple of keywords, plunk those into a search bar. Take the name of one of those articles that you are citing in your, in the beginning of your paper because that person writes frequently in your field. Put that person's name in, and it will generate a list of journals where that person is published, where those keywords are thought to be found, all those kind of things. And so especially when you're in a crossover field, which increasingly is happening, you're publishing at the crossroads of endocrinology and rheum, or whatever, diabetologists who are microbiologists and lipidologists. All of those things that don't have a home journal so far because the fields and the analytic techniques are really crossing over. This can be very helpful because you find journals that you would not otherwise have in your purview, and it's just a very handy platform, very easy to use. So I'd encourage you to have a look at it when you can and see where your journals that you think will come up actually do. The other nice thing about it is it generates a list of names of those journals, but it also and rank orders them by the ones that they think is the highest likelihood to the lowest of interest to your paper. But they also, when you click on that journal, it'll generate the list of articles that are the matches for you. So according to your search terms, however you've denominated them. So it's a very useful little tool. Now we're getting back to these. Now you've got 20 minutes or half an hour, not just 5 minutes on a crosstown bus, right? Now you've got a little bit of time to think about this. And time is a very important commodity, as we know. So all of you I know who are clinicians have your clinical schedules on your calendar. And I'm sure they're blocked out in red or purple or some other extremely noticeable color. And you also have, anybody who has a family, you've got everybody's pickup times listed on there. You've got the day that you're the snack parent, the dreaded snack parent. You have everybody's music lessons. Everything's on the calendar. Do you guys have your writing time? Who has writing time? Yay. Well done. Sunday morning. Right. Anybody else have their writing time scheduled out?
Oh, that's good.
Yes.
That's my bad.
But unless you actually have dedicated time on your schedule that you actually map out, that time gets sucked up by absolutely everything else. And I really would argue that you're doing yourself a terrible disservice by not carving out that time to think, to work. It doesn't have to be behind a desk, as you'll see in a minute. I have a lot of ideas about ways to walk along the East River and be thinking about things. But if you don't carve out the time, I will tell you that I get manuscripts at 3 o'clock in the morning and not from Zimbabwe. And people think that they've done really great work because the only quiet time in their house is between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. And if that is the only time that you have, then by all means go for it. But I will maintain for you that this is not the best work that these people do. And if you find a way to really schedule in, and you have to negotiate. You have to negotiate with your family about finding that Sunday morning time. You have to negotiate with your chair about taking a small writing retreat of a half a day, couple days a month. There are a lot of different negotiations that you have to have. But if you don't, then you will really be abrogating one of the important clauses on your brand new contract from Weill Cornell, joining the faculty, which is written in invisible ink on the back of the thing. You have to put lemon juice on it and hold it over a candle, but it says thou shalt publish. And if you do not publish, you know that your productivity and all of the other good things that come with being a good little citizen scientist faculty member go away. And so finding that time in the same way that you have your clinical time blocked and research time blocked, or if you use the PCR machine, you got that time blocked, which may be at 2 o'clock in the morning, you absolutely have to find that time for yourselves. So one of the things that you can do in this time that you've carved out is start thinking about the manuscript title. And the manuscript title really flows directly from your scribbling down and thinking about what that highest and best level message is that this particular body of research is pointing you toward. So you see here 2 examples of titles, and this actually came from the directions of one of the big heart meetings for, this was in their abstracts instructions, but I think it works just as well for journals. And that is, rather than, effects of hypoxia on KV 1.5 channels, it gives you, in their preferred version, the direction of the research. Hypoxia inhibits channels in rat pulmonary artery smooth muscle cells. So as I like to say, it takes you and puts you in, what galaxy you're in? The next set of words puts you in our solar system, then on our planet, then on our continent, then on our country, then state, city, and right down to your street address. And that is really what the process of writing does. And you have to do that, again, efficiently, using the words that describe the new, true, and important review criteria. So using magic words like a randomized trial, blinded, using the NHANES data set, all of those kinds of things are immediately, they're almost like heuristics, right? They tell the reader in shorthand how robust those research analytic methods were. Was it a really good, big, well-characterized data set so that immediately they can trust, at least from the beginning, what it says? The one exception to the showing the direction and giving the tell in your title of what your research findings ultimately are JAMA and the New England Journal, who, for reasons known best to themselves, like to leave you waiting and make you read through the whole thing to figure out really what's going on. But most other journals actually like to have a dynamic and conclusive rather than simply a descriptive title. So how do you get started? Well, stating the research question is sort of often a good way to do it. Is A associated with B in population C? So there is kind of the most simplistic version of how you get yourself kind of thinking. You almost PICO the title. You guys sort of know the PICO technique, right, from your first FE biostats class. So if you figure out your population, your intervention, your outcome, you've got your way towards thinking about a title. So is Tai Chi associated with falls in older women? That was the research question. This is a real study. The title is just turning that on its head, the effect of Tai Chi on risks of falls in older women. You use clear and precise descriptions, at least to get down the A associated with B in population C. And then you start kind of jazzing it up a little bit. You could state the main finding, right? Older women randomized to Tai Chi had a lower risk of falls and better quality of life than those randomized to a wait list. Kind of long, but you're now getting the idea of where this study was going. Interesting design features. You want to add in a randomized trial because, again, for that reader, that deputy section editor who receives this in her inbox in the morning, she'll immediately see, this is a randomized controlled trial. This gives me the true, right, of new, true, and important. At least the true piece kind of immediately clicks in for that person. Then you can polish it. Tai Chi prevents falls and improves quality of life in sedentary elderly women, a randomized trial. So you can see how over the course of maybe 20 minutes, you can go from that very A associated with B in population C to a title that actually describes where you went, how good the analytic approach was, and really is your finding important. We don't like the overboard. With rare exception, I'm not big on cute titles that actually ask questions in the title. You're never going to get a paper rejected because of the title unless it's truly offensive. But best to go with what that journal generally likes. So here's a checklist for your title. Are the title and the research question closely related? Is the title objective in tone? Even if it points in the direction of the research, it at least has to be objective. And are the special features of the study very, very carefully delineated? Any questions about that? Anybody else have a different way that they generally generate a title? It's pretty standard stuff, but if you have to teach it, this is kind of a nice distilled way of doing it. So this was actually the title as it ended up. So now we turn to the 4 basic parts of a paper. And I want to also reassure you that you're still not writing here. You may think you've started writing the paper, but you're still in that phase where even if you still only have about 20 minutes at a time, there's a lot of work you can be doing on the paper that's getting you going, that's getting the cognitive processes going, so that when you do have that time blocked off in your calendar, whether it's an hour here, 3 hours there, a half a day the week after, you will have these processes started well enough that you can start plugging in the writing processing. And I'll show you what I'm talking about here. So if you had to teach what the 4 parts of a paper are, and you can recite this in your sleep, you will have here sort of the distillation for somebody who's never written a paper before. But it's worth going back even if you're a very seasoned writer, because a lot of times we get stuck at one or another of these places, and reminding yourself what each section of the paper has to deliver is a good reminder of how you kind of get yourself started writing notes about it. So the introduction is the why it matters that you showed what you showed, the methods, how you did it, obviously, the results, actually showing it, and the discussion. What is the implication? So the discussion is not just, well, we did this and it sort of looks the same as the rest of the research that has been done before, so it supports. No. The discussion is really what the implication of your new finding is. So new, true, and important. This is where you're coming up with the importance of what it is and where this research should lead us as a field. So again, you're not even actually writing prose yet. I really think that starting before the beginning and scribbling a list of themes just for 15 or 20 minutes, and we're going to also do a little proof of concept here and take 1 minute and just free associate about what's going on with the research that the files that you just looked at, where you are with the paper right now. And it's in no order, it's not writing the introduction, it's just what are you thinking about with this paper right now? What's bothering you about it? What's exciting you about it? What is the next step that you want to make with it? And just write for a minute, all right? Go. write for another about 30 seconds. All right, finish whatever thought that was. Does somebody want to volunteer to just read us what you wrote? Anybody else? Everybody was writing something. What's your name? Or medical student?
Me?
Yes,
Jane.
Jamie.
Yeah.
Can you read us what you wrote?
So, boys, we can write about anything, right?
Yeah.
Well, because I didn't write mine related to the grant.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
Whatever you're working on right now.
Yeah, so I'm working on a review paper.
Mm-hmm.
So I just wrote down some tips and like conclusions.
But just read it out.
Okay, so basically the review paper is on how 3D printing is used for ear reconstruction and what people publish. So I just wrote like some notes to just to go back through all the literature and then for the conclusion, it's currently being used, but it's not reached its full capacity, and just to talk about how it can be expanded. I guess it's really all I've left is the conclusion.
So essentially what I've done is trick you into writing a to-do list.
Yeah, that's right.
That's-
I didn't know if that's what you wanted. us to do,
Yeah,
but
that's
what I
what I wanted you to do was whatever moved you at the moment. And the point is that once, and we don't have any cognitive psychologists in this group either, but cognitive psychologists will, explain better than I can about why that when you start sort of seeding the clouds in your head, it rains better. And part of that seeding is to create to-do lists. That list that you created of, check the literature on this, you've now given yourself a task that you can do when you have half an hour or 20 minutes later in the day. The conclusion, that's something you want to think about. You're going to noodle about that a little bit. You're going to come up with some implications about how there could be better use made of 3D printing. Is it because there is still some, engineering or structural barrier? Is it, convincing the patient that this is a good idea? Apropos of this, I was walking down Lex last night to go have dinner with my sisters, and I went past this 3D printing place called Doob. Have you guys seen this? It is instead of having a family portrait, you go into a booth that has 54 digital cameras, and they take a 360-degree image of you, and they use 3D printing somewhere in Brooklyn and create a little sculpture that is absolutely, it's like having a photograph, but a 3D sculpture of you, your family, your dog, and it was the creepiest thing I have ever seen. It was so creepy, and my sister said, do you think after they turn, D-O-O-B, so after, she said, do you think after they close the doors, like all the little dude figurines, it's like Toy Story, and they start fighting and having, internecine wars, it was so creepy, but it was kind of fascinating. You kind of couldn't look away. But I like.
I went in the room. I passed by, and I do a lot of 3D printing, so I want to see what they were doing.
Yeah.
It's a really high resolution printer. When you go in the room, there's like 52 Nikon cameras that all snap a photo of you at once from every angle, and then it gets sent to Brooklyn, and they print out a red one.
Yeah.
Into like a water bath.
It is very weird and creepy.
I was gonna put it down, right?
Yeah, but I like the idea of doing it for an ear or a kidney. That I can get behind. Anyway, somebody else want to just share whatever you've written.
I was thinking about what you said. So first of all, my title. So I'm working on manuscript. And initially, my title, which I had since quite a long time, was in vivo tracking of lymphocytes using DOTA-based antibody disorders. But then I thought, no, that's boring. And then, but I didn't know how to rephrase it. And as you just said, with the current task, I was just putting together what is bothering me, my missing experiments, figures, data that I need, and what I really want to include and what not, and also then the journal, if it should just be imaging journal or so, and then I realized somehow I came up with experiments using this reported team for tracking, and I realized that I haven't done two, which was essential. And yeah, then somehow I came up, I just thought, okay, maybe I have to say it's database antibody reporter tracking of lymphocytes. And I just realized maybe it's really just the methods, just publish on them, and then the next step would then be the biologic question. But I'm not sure if that, yeah, that's a party. I don't know if everything should be on.
So imagine that you got all that done in 1 minute. You just generated a list for yourself of things that'll take you a week to sort out, some of which we'll sort out. I hope you're coming for one of the tutorial sessions. I don't know if you signed up for one of them. We can sort out a couple of those things, or at least talk through them. A couple of those things may be things that you want to assign to somebody else to do, to check. That's another thing. You're worried about something in an analytic problem. So one of the notes to yourself is call biostatistician or call CTSC for a consult with a biostatistician to figure out this, that, or the other thing. All of these things progress the paper rather than what you might have been doing, which is sitting there fretting and thinking, ugh, I don't want to touch this. I can't do it anymore. You're advancing the process with all of these tasks. So the next thing, oh, and yeah, the snack is absolutely essential. The snack and sort of taking yourself for a walk or a run is the essential piece of all that we do. Yes,
Cleaning the house.
cleaning the house. Yes, it's amazing. It's amazing in grant writing cycle how clean your bathrooms are. They never look like that any other time. It's true. So the next piece of pre-writing work is, once you've now settled on at least that target journal, is to go to the instructions for authors and set up really the scaffold, the framework that journal writes. Now, among other reasons, to know where the highest and best use of your message is, and that's the journal it should go to. Can anybody think of a very good pragmatic reason why you'd want to have the journal selected before you start actually putting your hands on the keys?
You follow like previous papers that have
Exactly. The formatting, the length of the paper, there's a real difference between writing a paper for a journal that gives you 6,500 words, 150 references, 10 figures and tables, and writing a 1,500-word brief report that gives you 5 references and 2 figures, total of 2 figures or tables, right? Because efficiency, the ability to go schlep your mother up a 14,000-foot mountain, or go out for brunch with your children, or do anything you want to do, including stare into space like a cat. All of that turns on having your work be as efficient as possible. So writing even the outline for a paper that's going to be 6,500 words is a very different task than writing a shorter piece. So I really would encourage you to decide on the journal and the manuscript type within that journal, all of which is laid out for you in the instructions for authors. They will have a particular kind of heading structure. And I don't mean heading like it has to be Times New Roman 12. I'm talking about how they actually set up the substantive headings or subsections, how they like their abstract set up. Even if they tell you they want an unstructured abstract, I'm going to tell you to set it up as a structured abstract just for purposes of keeping yourself organized. So all of those things are wonderful to do because now you truly are not looking at a blank screen. You have your scribbled list of tasks. You have your scribbled list of ideas, some of which are going to be resultsy, some of which sound kind of conclusionary, and you can start dragging things into the parts of the paper where they belong, along with the big to-do questions, some of which get farmed out to somebody else, and some of which are retained by you. Now, the other little writing tip and self-editing tip I'm going to give you here is that everybody should have a folder on their desktop that's called Good Ideas for Another Day. One of the reasons that people get absolutely distracted away from the paper that we should be writing here about this particular reporter gene is because so many other ideas are flooding your brain, and you think to yourself, if I don't follow this one and look at the, the prior art on this one and look at the research, I'm going to forget it, and my fabulous Nobel perspective will disappear into the ether. Not actually going to happen, but you can reassure yourself by taking those fragmented thoughts that are generated in that list that you've created, that master list that is also sitting somewhere on your desktop, and dragging some of those ideas just into a document that has a title, or just a document that has a bunch of different paper titles or ideas in it. You will not forget them if they're written down, and once they're written down, you actually can safely put them to bed and turn your attention back to this paper. Because being a completer is one of the other characteristics, along with having really smart scientific ideas, really good research skills, excellent people skills, all those 8 billion other things that you need to be a successful person in academic medicine. But being a completer may be top among them. And completing a manuscript, getting it off, and getting it published is the task that we have in front of us. Nothing more lofty than that. All right? So now you're really going to put on the sorting hat. Now we're starting to get to the point where I can't excuse it anymore, and we actually have to call it writing. So take out the scribbled list, look and see where you are, and start writing a meaningful topic sentence. So if you were not educated in the United States in 4th grade, I will clue you into the fact that what we did in 4th grade, at least in every public school in the United States, was learn how to write a topic sentence. And the topic sentence of the paragraph is that highest level idea that then gets fleshed out in the middle part of the sentence of the paragraph with the evidence that supports the topic sentence, and ends with a conclusion. Right? This is all I'm asking you to do, is write the topic sentence for each of these ideas, each of those middle meat parts of the results, perhaps, because articulating the results in a particular way passes that message through rather than just sort of randomly citing them. This is all about being thoughtful at every stage of the way. When you find yourself not being thoughtful, that is a good place to stop and take a walk. Change of scenery, call somebody to share the pain, and go sit in a different carrel in the library. Everybody will find a different way and a different place to do this. I can't stand any hubbub when I'm editing, particularly. I need absolute dead silence. Other people work very, very well with a little bit of tumult going on around them. Find what works for you and use it. Open your EndNote or other reference library and start trolling around and pulling into the different sections where you want to talk about those prior references. All of that is then getting you further towards the tasks and completing them. Am I standing right in the way of the slides? Okay. So this is somebody, I think you said, you're the gentleman's name right here, whose name is?
Dennis.
Dennis. You had said that where you start often is with figures and tables or something with your papers. And many people will say that because we're all different kind of learners. So if you're a particularly visual person and you want to get those very high level, most important results out there, you create a figure that describes it, or make your table one, something like that.
Yeah, I try to put the figures together and just wrap the story on the figures.
Exactly. And that's a perfectly good way to start also, because it maps out for you where you're going with the paper. So you don't have to do it, though, in exquisite format. You can do it on a piece of paper just to start. I don't know how, do you typically like to start either in PowerPoint or Excel, or do you do it on a piece of paper?
Well, I just kind of draw the figures first.
Mm-hmm.
And see what I have. And then kind of write the figure legends.
Mm-hmm.
And then when the figure legends all right, the results, and I'll just kind of piece things together.
A perfectly great way to do things. So you're not wasting time frittering away with, and also, that journal that you've chosen. If you start doing your figures in Excel and then it turns out they want them in PowerPoint, that is a weekend you ain't ever getting back. So good idea to know which journal you're going for, but to write them out longhand, scribble them out, write out the figure legends, and then create them in whatever electronic format, whatever figure maker they want you to use. this is an excellent time to go for a bike ride or a walk or a run. So my sort of request to you the next time that you're thinking about writing a paper is, if you're a very visual person like Dennis and you want to start with the figures or tables, I think that's a great idea. I like to suggest to people that they start by writing the intro, or the first writing task, even before the results or the methods, is to write the intro. Because the intro is really the arc of the paper in miniature, of what you're going to lay out for the reader, and if they stick with you, what they're going to get by the end. And it's really, again, you don't have to start from scratch. You start with the research question. You start with what kept you up at night about this problem that you have now developed a little bit of an answer to. And when the deputy section editor, who's going to be your first reviewer, reads that intro or reads the beyond the paper title into that first paragraph, you need to impress upon them why, even though they didn't know they should have been kept up at nights about this, you were, it's important, and you've got a solution. And all of that comes out in the first 4 or 5 paragraphs, which is the intro. So I like writing with a style manual. The JAMAS, the AMA style manual happens to be a very good one. You have every unit of measure. You have every pharmacologic. You have every pathway listed out. If you're a non-native English speaker and you're writing in English, it has a grammar guide in it. Even for our native English speakers, it has a grammar guide in it. It has really excellent resource for any writer, and it's very engagingly written and very easy to follow. So the content of the introduction, it's in the present tense for established knowledge of starting out with what the problem is, right? So you describe the background, the reason for the study and why the problem was compelling, the state of the field, so the essential gap in the knowledge, not an explication of all of the relevant literature. That's going to come later in your discussion when you're describing how you fit in the cosmology of the existing literature. Here, it's important to say that there was a gap in the knowledge, so of new, true, and important. It's important to bridge a gap, and why your findings are going to be relevant, what the implications are, again, towards the importance piece, and perhaps even the contribution you're going to make. And you close this section with a roadmap. So, again, the cognitive psychologists can explain to us why when we tell someone they're going to find something, they in fact find it. But you give sort of in miniature your hypothesis, design, sample, and method. And that, again, cements that new, true, and important. So this is the true section again. The reader, by the time they get to the end of the intro, should understand that by reading further, they can trust in your findings. They can trust in your results. All right? Seem clear to everybody? So the paper that I've deconstructed here is from one of my former case scholars, who's now a professor for many years, has been at the University of Pittsburgh. He is,
So
Yeah.
I have a question.
yes,
I usually try to write the intro last though, because I look at the figures and then I kind of see if everything makes sense, because then I can build a conclusion on the figures, and then in the intro, I usually put the motivation and then kind of summarize what the findings are again. So I won't know what they are until I kind of put everything there and look at the data, because it changes.
if that is what works for you, then I heartily endorse it. And starting with the figures so that you know what the story is, I think is important. But I think writing it, starting the discussion before you've written the intro may end up with a little bit of wheel spinning, because knowing where you're going with it will guide you in terms of, for instance, which pieces of the relevant literature you want to expose in the discussion when you then get to how the implications of how your findings now tie the field together, move it in a different direction. It's just an idea. So again, whatever works for you is what you should utilize. This is, just another way of doing it. So, yeah.
Well, I think for what I understand from both of you, is that the intro will actually tell you, as Amy said, what you're about to see.
Mhm.
So you don't need to write completely the intro. You can do bullet points. But at least in your mind, at the end of the intro of all papers, it says, we will show you, or in that kind of sense. And once you have that, then you can write your discussion with the mindset of what you wrote in the intro.
That's my theory about it, but it works differently for everybody. And I'll show you in a couple of paragraphs here, a couple of slides later, how that might work out. So I would really encourage you to actually find this paper and have it, because it's an excellent guide. And this came out in JAMA last year, and I called Doug White, who I maintain relationships with all my old scholars who have now gone off and are doing great things everywhere else. And I said, Doug, I don't know whether you still had that old algorithm in front of you, but this is such a perfect exemplar of everything that I try to teach. And he said, oh, are you kidding? I use that damn thing all the time. So I felt extremely gratified. But you'll see, and I've taken the liberty of bolding some of this. But here is the background in the intro, right? The title, Prevalence and Factors Related to Discordance About Prognosis Between Physicians and Surrogate Decision Makers of Critically Ill Patients. So again, this is a JAMA paper, so there's no, directionality. It's just laying out basically what his concern was. So this is an intensivist who does palliative medicine, who spends all of his time in the ICU trying to explain to families what they don't want to hear and how they don't, and understanding that they don't understand when doctors speak to them about their critically ill family members. So family members or other individuals are apt to serve as surrogate decision makers in these often difficult decisions. Numerous studies over the last decades indicate that surrogates of patients with advanced illness have optimistic expectations. This is problematic because, so again, he's setting up what the major gap in the knowledge is, sort of where things have gone, where he sees it as a problem. An important barrier to progress up here is now again where he's describing what's leading him to what's been keeping him up at night. Important barrier to progress is the lack of a clear understanding of the causes of these misperceptions. Now he talks about, again, the gap in the literature, how the prior literature is a little shaky. Several small qualitative and simulation-based studies have found this and that, but these hypotheses have not been empirically validated in surrogates making actual decisions for incapacitated patients. So new, true, important is just laid right out there in his intro. Without clarity about factors that contribute to discordance, it will be difficult to design interventions, right? So he lays out what the implication is. Why has the field not advanced further? Why are we still talking to patients, families, and surrogates and still ending up with these very heart-wrenching, gut-wrenching misperceptions and discordance? Since he deals with, for the medical students in our next session, we're going to talk about how you develop a research question. And one of the first ways you develop a research question comes out of your clinical experience of a clearly unmet need. So this is a very, very seasoned clinician who is still burdened by every day having to deal with these very difficult decisions and not having a good way to understand where the lesion is. Why are we not connected, right? So that's the gap in the knowledge. Here's his roadmap. We therefore sought to quantitatively determine the prevalence of physician surrogate discordance and to qualitatively understand reasons that surrogates sometimes hold beliefs that are different from physicians' assessments. Okay, so he sets it all out for you. It's all right there in the intro. The final test, could you tell why he did this study and how it may advance the current state of the evidence? Just from reading those sort of highlighted points. And if you then put yourself in the mindset of whatever you're writing now and follow that same kind of pathway, I will not say that the intro writes itself, but you can see the setup of gap in the knowledge, keeps you up at night. Former studies are in, and he doesn't go into great detail about these other studies. He just groups them together to say they're largely qualitative, have been too small, and haven't been done with real people. They've only been done in these sort of simulation-based things, and where he's going to go with it, right? So, how to improve the introduction, any introduction. Again, focusing on the big picture, don't stating anything that's too obvious, summarizing but not describing studies one by one of the, sort of preliminary state of the field as it is now. Avoiding jargon and acronyms, also very, very important. You don't want to turn your reader off. Again, the educated and interested but perhaps slightly careless reader. You don't want to turn them off. How do you shorten the introduction? Is it more than 4 paragraphs or 5 paragraphs? You may have gone overboard. Did you describe prior research in too much detail? Again, these are only listed here so that you can have a checklist, a self-editing checklist for yourself of likely candidates of places to shorten up. Now, write the easy parts first. Here, if you've worked on your figures and your tables and you kind of know what the story is that you're developing around, now you can sort of knock off the methodology, which should really just be the absolute recapitulation of exactly what you did. It's generally written in the past tense for what you did. And you don't change anything from the original proposal. You do it absolutely accurately, exactly like your protocol. And if you have to teach this, here's another quick little checklist for what goes in the methods. Who did you study? What did you do to them? How did you make your measurements? How did you do the comparisons? What were the statistical tests that you applied that show that A was not associated with B or whatever it was? Again, with the methods, you must have the design, the subjects, the measurements, and the analysis. So think about whoever you're working with, who you have to teach this to, or if you're editing yourself, just pull it out, check it, and make sure you've got everything in there. Ways to organize predictors before outcomes. It seems so obvious, and yet when you're writing, before you sort of self-edit yourself, you can mix things up a little bit sometimes. In a medical presentation, we start with the most simple and obvious, and we move on to the more complex. And then we explain odd decisions. So here's where you have to also think about the journal itself. An appropriate level of detail is what that journal knows their readers need. So if you go back to those couple of papers that you pulled that have been published in this journal before your target journal and read through their methods and their results, you'll see the level of detail that they have deemed acceptable. Model yours the same way. The analysis, again, don't just list the test, but describe your thinking process, why you decided to use this particular analytic version, how you knocked out variables from your univariable model and put them into your multivariate model. All those kinds of things should be explained. Making sure the main result is obvious seems like an obvious thing to say, but you'd also be a little bit surprised, and I'm sure you've read papers where you think to yourself, why the heck did they have, result 3 is really the one that answers the research question. Self-editing, making sure that you're leading with the most important critical points and that one builds on the next. Again, if you have to teach this, here's another little order of presentation checklist that you can give to your mentee about how to set up their results. It is a feature of most English language scientific journals that we present the results in a very antiseptic way without any explanation, right? We just say A was not associated with B. We say that C was only associated with D in this population. We don't give any of the explanatory material. But when you start writing that you're kind of writing the explanation along with it. I'm pretty sure that most of you have that experience. It's very hard just to write the results kind of siloed off. Don't stop yourself. That's what cut and paste is all about. Use that explanatory material to really figure out how to link your results. What's the good, a good way to string those pearls on the necklace so that it follows as a whole story. But you will have to then go back and cut and paste it into your discussion later on. But don't stop yourself. This set of bulleted points, again, the results are written generally in the past tense for what you found. These are really thought questions to start getting the ferment going about how the discussion is going to work. What grabbed you about your results? Did you find something unexpected, or is it confirmatory, but confirmatory but, right? Confirmatory but with a twist on it. What are the research or social policy implications? Is there a practical clinical tear out kind of to your results? Would clinical practice change next week because your results are actually so strong that you feel like you can change things up a bit? So, two articles that I really commend to your attention, and we're going to come back to Doug White's article in a second. This was in the New England Journal last year also. It's called The Primary Outcome is Positive, Is That Good Enough? And here, this is their table 1 of what the questions are that you want to ask yourself. Not just, yes, we found it, yes, our technique was pristine and we had 95% follow-up. But ask yourself, is the trial large enough to be convincing? Is the efficacy safety balance patient specific? All the kinds of things that make an article of real interest to a journal, all right? And that's with positive findings. What if the primary outcome fails? Happens to everybody. And you think, oh my God, I've wasted this. Where am I going to get it published? Again, a really great list of questions that lets you kind of come up with the limitations, but also write around them. Maybe the secondary outcomes were actually really positive and are hypothesis generating. There's a whole bunch of stuff that you can do, even if you have a negative finding. So again, I commend to your attention both of these articles and have them close by because it's a great little set of checklists for yourself. No panicking, no wasted data. That's the other team cheer. The discussion content. Answer the research question in sentence 1 of paragraph 1. This is really about not having a blank page in front of you. Is the discussion where everybody starts getting panicky? Like, what am I going to write or what am I going to do? See some shaking heads. It takes a while to set it up. I'm going to give you, again, a little bit of an algorithm for how to set up the discussion. So at least if you seed your blank page with these subject subheadings, you'll find a way to then fill in underneath, I think, with much greater ease. Highlight the findings as they relate to the study's purpose. Did you tested a hypothesis? If it was a hypothesis, what happened? Did you get the null? Evaluate the findings in relation to the existing literature. That's a fairly easy way to do things, and I have a bunch of good opening sentences and segues to sort of feed you to do that. Discuss the limitations and conclude with recommendations. That's the whole story of the discussion. And even if you just take those bullet points and you stick them in there and start writing underneath them, it comes together. I pretty much can promise you that. So here is the question that Doug posed in the intro of his study. Clinicians cite unrealistic expectations by surrogates as one of the most important barriers to high-quality end-of-life care. Although misperceptions about prognosis are well documented, an important barrier is the lack of clear understanding of the causes of these misperceptions. That was in his intro. Here's the answer, which appears absolutely first sentence of the discussion. Among a diverse cohort of critically ill patients at high risk of death, we found a high prevalence of physician-surrogate discordance. The discordance was associated with both misunderstandings by surrogates of physicians' assessment of prognosis and by surrogates holding different beliefs about a patient's prognosis compared with what they perceived to be the physician's assessment. So he reminds you of what that research question was, and he answers it. And then he goes on. So how to style your discussion. Now, this comes directly from all the years I spent writing legal briefs. We were taught that you start with, the idea, the topic sentence that you're going to discuss in that paragraph, the analysis, so the clinical explanation or the study results that support that topic sentence, and your conclusion, which sums up the analysis and gets you to the next paragraph, right? So the segues to get you started about that context is these results are consistent with, and then you describe the 3 studies that this is most consistent with, but why your results are actually superior because your methodology was better, you had way less loss to follow up, you used a better analytic platform, you used the most recent, the cutting edge technique, whatever it is. Our results suggest, we believe our findings do this and that. You know, why might your results differ from somebody else? You have to explain this. So just set yourself up with some of these segues. Once you get through with your main findings using these top, 4 or so, you have a couple of other interesting things to say about other things that are not quite in the good ideas for another day, but still relevant to this paper. We made several other observations, right? There's several other interesting things, hypothesis-generating ideas that you can write about in your discussion. So this is from Doug's paper again. The pattern of our findings fits with insights from social psychology about biases in individuals' risk perceptions. And then he went on to describe how this framework gives support to his findings. And then, directly from my slides, a noteworthy finding from our semi-structured interviews is that, right? So again, he's just highlighting you so you can go back to that table, you can go back to that figure that he used, you can go back to the box in which he has some nice quotes from the semi-structured interviews that he did. He's giving you a roadmap at every step. Hammer the implications. There are at least 2 clinical implications of our findings. It doesn't have to be War and Peace. We're not talking about writing the great Russian novel here. We're talking about telling somebody what they want to find easily, right? First, given the high rates of concordance, blah, 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 blah. So he tells you what the implications are. And then you anticipate possible criticism, right? You have to write a limitation section, which is, of course, laying bare the greatest insecurity you have about your results or about your analytic method or about something that went haywire while you were doing the study. Come up with it up front. Describe why, despite the fact that you had this little kerfuffle, the results are nonetheless strong enough so that the person can still take to the bank the new, true, and important. So this study has several strengths. We used a mixed methods approach. We validated our qualitative findings through. We did this, we did this. Additionally, we interviewed actual surrogates rather than using a simulation, right? So that's how he set up what were clear limitations in the methodology. The study has several limitations, although we recruited a diverse cohort, we were limited to just one part of the country, blah, 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 right? So you know how to do that, but just set it up with a counterbalancing strength. And conclude with a send-off. That's the only place that I thought this paper was not that strong, and I think it's just because he ran out of words, and so at that point they let him give up. But it shouldn't just be more research should be done because this is an important question and we haven't answered all of it. We don't have a complete answer. Set a research agenda. Figure out who your collaborators and co-conspirators are going to be writing your next grant. Set up some controversy. As long as it is well founded on the evidence, I'm all for controversy. Practical advice, return to the instructions for authors. Make sure that all your formatting, all of your word length, everything else is all up to snuff. Print hard copy and try to prove hard copy with a red pen, not red because I'm in love with red because I'm an editor, because you see red ink on white paper with black font. It's just a practical thing. You will find so many things. The clinical trails that I have gone down when they meant clinical trials, and in a neuro paper, the trials making test rather than the trails making test, Word is not your friend here. Spell checker is not your friend. You have to actually do it first and then spell check it. One last quick word about sending it off to your co-authors. I neglected to say early on. When you start thinking about the title of this paper is when you should send out an email to your co-authors and particularly your senior mentor, all of whom are extremely busy people, and say, today is May 16th or whatever, is today May 16th? I am aiming to submit this to the Journal of Neurotrauma on July 1st. I will be sending you the paper on or about June 14th, and I would really appreciate your return of the paper by June 21st. First of all, it gives them an opportunity to say, no, I'm going to my kid's graduation, that's not going to work for me. But also, it's very respectful of their time and yours. And you write it very nicely and say, because I want to have plenty of time to incorporate what I know is going to be extremely helpful feedback. And because it's not a grant, you are having to self-manage a due date. By writing it down and having it there, you've given that sort of, superego piece is right in there for us. And you will stick to it. Again, not only putting in your research time and your writing time in your calendar, but the dates by which you are going to get things back and forth from your co-authors and off to a journal. Very, very important. Make sure you always give credit and acknowledgement of your funders and your support. We're going to zip in 2 minutes through responding to reviews. So really, you open the reviews and you read the first line and you think to yourself, wait, it's my baby. Don't tell me I have an ugly baby. Or, no bride is not beautiful on her wedding date. What are you saying here? And you feel undermined. Send off the reviews to your co-authors immediately. Close your computer. Definitely go out for a martini. Pick it up the next day. Listen, saturated fats and alcohol are the only way to get through a lot of this stuff. Carbs help too. But read it a second time, because what it will do is actually get directly to the heart of what your greatest insecurities were. And then you thought these things through, and you'll write around them. Why is it rejected? Not true, not relevant. This we call it the train wreck, right? Not true, relevant, appropriate, interesting, or novel. Take a stepwise approach to that response to editor letter, and remember, you're writing a response to the editor, not to the reviewers. So sometimes what the reviewers have said is absolutely off point, and you've got to convince the editor that they should listen to you, not the reviewer, that you've chosen not to make the revision the reviewer requested because there's a very good evidence base for not doing so. But sometimes, and often, the reviewer gives you excellent feedback that improves the paper. So I have a suggestion. When you get the letter from the editor, it's written, in text and an email, and it's just like big blocks of screen. Cut and paste it into a table in which everything that came from the editor is in the left column. The to-do list basically is in the middle column. Maybe the location of where it's going to appear in the manuscript you sort of put in the right-hand column. And I would also actually encourage you to add a list of initials of your co-author, who you as the first author are assigning everybody else to do. And it's just somehow, again, cognitively, if it's in a tabular format, it's much easier to deal with, and you can sort of knock off pieces as you go. And then you just take that middle section once you've got everything formulated the way you want it, and you cut, you cut and paste it into a letter format, and you make sure that all of the red line that you've done in track changes in your manuscript that's going back is accurately tracked in the letter. So it's just a quick and easy way to manage what seems like an overwhelming amount of work. So here, why was table 3 split into 2 tables? You changed it to a single table, blah, blah, blah. I mean, it seems like all sorts of silly things, but again, this is something that your research coordinator can do while you move on to the more substantive work that you have to do. Always find things that you can triage to somebody else. If the reviewer completely missed the point, then you write a little brief on your own behalf about why you're not changing it. It's possible that somebody really was biased against you. And if that is the case, then you owe yourself the service of explaining to the editor why you're right and you're not right. What if your 2 mentors disagree? Well, you got to pull on your big boy, big girl pants and do the exact same thing. It's your decision about which piece of advice you're going to take. And again, you go with the evidence. You go with the evidence that is the strongest. You write to the mentor whose advice you are not taking in a grown-up and mature way and explain why it is that you have decided to take the alternate course. Nobody is going to kick you out of their program for disagreeing. Evidence carries the day. There's a whole bunch of examples of misreads that I have in here that, in the interest of time, we won't go through, but I encourage you to have a look at them at your leisure. Thank you so much for your attention and allowing me to go over by a few minutes.